Okay, I think we're recording. Well, welcome to our weekday text gathering, everyone. Today is day 112 in the Circle's reading schedule, and we are discussing Chapter 7, Section 7, the ego's use of projection. In the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles, you can find this on page 286. In this section, we are continuing our look at projection and the ways in which the ego uses it to very skillfully preserve conflict. There is some very powerful content today, particularly around the topic of anger. So I know that you'll find this relevant. Whether this is your first time joining us or whether you've been here since the beginning, a very, very warm welcome to you all. This group keeps getting bigger and bigger, and that's so nice to see. We're so glad that you're here. Please note that you can always find the reading schedule, the recordings, and the handouts for these gatherings at circleofa.org/text gathering. You are, of course, welcome to share that link with your course friends, and we hope that you will. And now, wherever you are in the world, I invite you to take a deep breath with me. And bow your head in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to come together today as loving friends and mighty companions on this remarkable path of light. We surrender this gathering to you and ask that it serve your purposes and be blessed by you. Dear God, we ask that you remove in us any blocks to the awareness of your presence, and may we learn to think like you so that we may be led to the highest vision of ourselves and one another. We ask that you use this time to plant within us the seeds of grace, that we may emerge from this experience more humble, peaceful, and loving beings. Teach us what to do, because only that we will to do. Please take a moment to extend your love and blessing to everyone on this call. You can say silently to each person in your mind, you are the home of light and joy and peace. You are the home of light and joy and peace. Now take a moment to receive the love and blessing from all of those who are blessing you right now. Say to yourself, I am the home of light and joy and peace. I welcome them into the home I share with God because I am a part of Him. I am the home of light and joy and peace. I welcome them into the home I share with God because I am part of Him. Father, we ask that you purify our hearts that we may hold your peace. Join with us so that our hands may be strong enough to give it. And so it is. Amen.
Amen. Okay, well, as Emily said, we are talking about projection again today. This section is called The Ego's Use of Projection. And it has some really important things to say about projection and kind of the parent law of projection, which is extension. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay, so this section teaches that extension, which is this basic dynamic of mind, whereby the mind expresses outwardly what it holds within it, it says that that is an absolute law. We have no choice but to utilize it. So the mind's always going to take what it holds within and express it without, extend it without, or project it without. So we have to utilize that law. It's like the law of gravity. You know, when you think of a law, you think of something, not so much laws of society, but laws of nature. You think you have no choice but to obey them. And this is like that. Only the Course doesn't think the laws of nature are ultimately real laws, and this is a real law. Okay, but we can obey it in two entirely different ways. And those two ways are extension and projection. And they're very different in how they operate, and they're opposite in their results. So with extension, he says, you give what you value in order to keep it in your own mind. So when you extend something in the Course's sense of that word, you take something in yourself that you want to keep, something you value, and you give it to others in the awareness that as you give it, it simply is reinforced and strengthened in you. It's magnified in you. Projection, he describes as a way of getting rid of something the ego, does not want. So projection, there's something you don't want in you, and you throw it outside of you onto somebody else. Of course, it doesn't actually ever leave you. It's just it's a perceptual illusion. So rather than it's something you want, you retain it in you, you give it out in order to increase it in you, it's something you don't want in you, you throw it out there so that you can see it outside of you. In the beginning of this section, he lays out that basic contrast. And I think one of the reasons that it's important one of the reasons that he uses those two terms, extension and projection, is the terms may seem similar at first blush, but they're actually very different. When you project something, think of a projectile. You're throwing it, you're shooting it, throwing it, propelling it away from you, right? When you extend something, you envision the thing you're extending as staying in place and simply reaching or expanding outward. When I looked up extension in the dictionary, one of the examples it gave was like a patio extension. When you do a patio extension, do you take your patio and throw it onto somebody else's property? No, you simply enlarge it, you extend it. So extension and projection are different words. They mean very different things. Okay, so from that starting point, the section really talks mostly about projection. Tomorrow's section will talk more about extension. Okay, so I've got a diagram, and it's very simple and clunky, but hopefully it will do the trick. On the left side is your mind, and on the right side is others. This section talks a lot about projecting conflict, but to really understand that, you have to understand what it means to project conflict. It's not really explained in this section. It's explained much more in chapter 12, so quite a ways going forward. The idea is this, and this is where the diagram's at its clunkiest, but so this is your mind, and this is the light in your mind. That's the top circle or semicircle, and the bottom is the ego. Okay, so if you feel that your mind encompasses light and darkness, good and evil, God and the ego, you're in conflict. Have you ever really felt torn between the best in you and the worst in you? From the Course's standpoint, we're in that conflict all the time, but there are times when we're really aware of it, where we really want to love and we really want to attack. That is a state of inner conflict, and it's extremely uncomfortable. It's an intolerable state. We hate being in that inner conflict. Okay, so that's the conflict he's talking about, that the ego is trying to get rid of through projection. The quote from the section says, it, the ego, projects conflict from your mind to other minds in an attempt to persuade you that you have gotten rid of it. Now, there may be some sense in which the ego projects the whole conflict, but I think, based on what the Course says elsewhere, that what it's doing is it's projecting the ego side of the internal conflict. And I finally came up with that view after sort of trying to figure this out for a long time, based on some things said in places like chapter 12. And then I found this personal guidance that Helen had received for her and Bill, and it talked about her projecting one side of the internal conflict. And that was, to me, confirmation, because that is exactly the view I'd come to. And there it was said flat out. The ego's projecting one side of the internal conflict, is projecting the ego side. So having this presence of ego in us is what makes for the conflict. Without that, we wouldn't feel conflicted. Okay, it's the combatant that's waging the war. So we then project it outside of us. Okay, so now what's going on is this. The rest of the circles are not how it really is, but how it looks to us. If you project the ego side of the conflict in you onto others, well, what do they look like? They just look like pure ego, right? Or mostly ego. And now the conflict isn't in you between different parts of your own mind. That top part of your mind from before, that looks like all of your mind now. The bottom part of your mind from before, that looks like them. And since the conflict was between those two things, it looks like the conflict now is between them and you. And it's coming from their side. Right? So I wish I had some way to really reflect this in the way the diagram's drawn. If I had more control over it, I probably could do it. But just imagine, if you can picture this conflict here in your own mind, it's the same conflict as here, really, right? Just kind of rotate. If you rotate the whole thing counterclockwise, like 90 degrees, then you get this. Do you see that? Okay, so now the ego has gotten rid of the conflict from our mind. We feel in conflict with the world, but have you ever noticed how much more comfortable it is to feel in conflict with the world than to feel torn down the middle of your own mind, where you want to love and you want to hate and you don't know what you stand for? You don't know what the ground is that you stand on. That's so uncomfortable. It's more comfortable to think, I'm all light and their darkness, and they're causing conflict, but thank God they're the cause of it, right? Okay, so the section says a bit more about the conflict and projection and so on. We still have an ego in us that we're aware of. Okay, it doesn't seem like the big fat one that we had up here. It's small, it's tame, it's more like a little puppy. Okay, but even though it's in us, we know that they're the cause of it. Okay, so we look outside, we see their big fat ego, we see them causing conflict with us, we see them attacking us, conflicting with us. Okay, and in doing so, whatever ego is in us, guess where it came from? Came from them. Yeah. And that's how it seems. I mean, we all believe that. Like, well, I've got an ego, but I can tell you where it came from. I can tell you this, certain events in my life, certain relationships, certain kind of patterns in my history, right? Other people put it in me. Without them, I'd be so innocent and so pure and so loving. I mean, let's face it, that's how we think. So I've got a supportive quotation here. It says, do not project the responsibility for your belief in it, the ego, onto anyone else, or you'll preserve the belief. So when we think, I do have an ego, but I know where it came from them, that's projection. Where the cause of the ego is internal. We've projected that cause onto people outside of us, and now the cause seems to be external.
Robert, Lynn is saying once projected by the ego, the conflict appears gone, and she goes on to ask, can the ego create a state of amnesia and run a different story regarding the event?
I'm not sure I'm following that. Do you want to try to, if you get it, can you elaborate?
Well, once projected by the ego, the conflict appears gone. I don't think that's entirely what you're saying. It's once the conflict is projected, it just appears outside of you.
Right.
And
It's
so
not
it's
within your
caused by
mind. It's coming.
somebody else. So,
Right.
so it's still there
Yeah.
and strong as ever. It's outside of you, and therefore you feel at the effect of it versus the cause of it.
But you get to feel comfortably unified. And that's a big deal. We need to feel unified within. And so the conflict has gone from your mind, and now it's out there. So that's the value to the ego of projection.
Yeah. And this leads to,
Shall I go on?
yeah.
Okay. So now they're the cause of your conflict with the world. We all know that. They're the cause of the ego in you. We all know that. And now, of course, we feel anger. Right? If they've done that, they've done those two red arrows, then of course we're angry at them. Okay, they caused us to have an ego when we could have been just the most mild, innocent kitten in the world. They've caused us to be in conflict with our world, and those conflicts define our lives. Okay, so the passage says, when you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence yourself, you will have laid aside all anger and all attack, because they come from the attempt to project the responsibility for your own errors. So your ego, the things your ego has you do, right? The things you regret doing later, if you can just tell a story in which all of that was caused in you by somebody else, then it's like you're off the hook. You're still the light, right? With a little bit of darkness in you, but hey, you didn't put it there. What this says a lot, this one sentence, but one of the things it says is that anger and attack, I probably should add attack to the diagram here. They come from the projection onto others of causation of your errors, right? You're responsible for your errors, but you project that responsibility onto them. And that's what we saw in this third one here.
Now you're the victim, so you get to attack.
You're the victim, so you get to attack. And while I've got the screen like this, I just want to point out that these three steps seem to us to be the way things are. Okay. We look inside and we all have the best intentions, right? Don't we all have the best intentions? That's why this is a bright yellow. We look out there, and do all the people out there have the best intentions? No, they don't. Okay. We are in conflict with the world. Where's that coming from? It's coming from them. Okay. So that looks like the way things are. This next one looks like the way things are. Yeah, we've got some ego in us. Okay, it's there, but they caused it. That looks like the way things are. Okay. And then with this final one, of course, we get angry and attack them. Obviously, given these two steps, what else would we do? What else would be justified? So this looks like reality to us. And yet, it's the natural, inevitable result of this very first step. Once you take the ego side of the conflict in you and project it onto them, all the rest of this follows. So we really, the brilliance in the course's view of projection is that it lays before us this choice. We can say, okay, my view of myself and the world and the relationship between those two things, it can be completely true, or it can be a massive perceptual trick resulting from projection, because this kind of projection predicts all the rest of this. And the reason I think that, aside from the course telling us this, if we trust the course, the reason to buy this is that in our view, where these final three steps are objective truth, we end up being this odd exception, right? It just so happens that we're the one with the good intentions. And there's all those bastards out there, with the dark intentions, full of ego, et cetera, et cetera. We just happen to have lucked out to be born the pure one. And isn't that a little bit like unlikely and incredibly convenient? So I think the odds are against us if we're going to think this is objectively real. There's good reason to think, you know what, I'm living inside this big deception produced by projection.
Robert, in a recent text gathering, we were talking about how to discern real guidance from our ego. And one of the things that you said that I remember being struck by is that if you feel completely self-righteous, if you feel that you are the complete innocent one, that's probably your ego talking and not real guidance. And that's often how we feel in this model that you're describing here and what's described in the section.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not to say that, all situations are different. And sometimes one person is mainly in the right. Sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes it's 70-30. But it's just so convenient how we tend to see the world, where we just have the good intentions and those guys don't.
Yeah, and there's a difference between being right and being self-righteous.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So are there any
Yes,
questions, comments?
yes, there
It's a
are.
juicy topic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really juicy topic. And I love how the course paints this distinction between extension and projection, where extension is you give what you value, love because you want to keep it, and projection is you give what you don't want because you don't want to keep it. And that's where we get into the anger and attack. But either way, whether you're extending love or projecting anger and attack, you are strengthening that in you. And so when you say the
Right.
course lays before you a choice, yes, that's your choice at all times. And while I'm finding the questions here, do you want to say what the course says about the opposite of the golden rule? Because that feels like it applies here.
Oh, well, yeah. There's this great comment, and he points it out, I think, more than once in chapter 1, that to throw onto somebody else your inner garbage is the opposite of the golden rule, because in the golden rule, you do unto others what you want, how you want them to do unto you. You give them what you want to receive yourself. And in projection, you do the exact opposite. You chuck onto them the stuff you don't want. So I don't know if anyone's ever pointed that out before the course, but once it's pointed out, you think, well, yeah, to dump my inner garbage on you. I mean, just think about, the feeling that goes along with that statement. It is the opposite of the kindness of the golden rule.
Eileen says, what about their egos and its tax on us? Is that happening at the same time?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
it's
both
all
sides are
happening.
doing that, but both sides are in their own bubble of illusion.
Mhm. Lots of questions here about the ego. Do you want to take questions, or do you want to do the exercise and then go into questions? There's so much here on the ego. Many questions about.
Okay, let's do the exercise. It's pretty short. This one's from Greg. It's from the Course Companions commentaries. So go ahead and think of someone whom you believe has strengthened the anger, judgment, shame, and fear within you. In other words, someone who has apparently reinforced your ego. Now reclaim your responsibility for your own ego and let your ego be undone with these words. So go ahead and repeat these in your mind after me. And I'll ask you to fill in the person's name. So have that specific person in mind the whole way through. I will not project responsibility for my ego onto, and say the person's name. I accept sole responsibility for my ego's existence. Once again, I accept sole responsibility for my ego's existence. And I give it quickly over to the Holy Spirit to undo completely. So that all of its effects may vanish from my mind and from the sonship as a whole. Amen. That was kind of powerful to say, I will not project responsibility for my ego onto that person.
Goes
It
along
just
with you're not.
shows,
Sorry, go ahead.
it just shows how much we do that. What were you going to say?
That it also shows the power of not being at the effect of their misperceptions of you too.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Okay, John is asking, don't every time you do that, I lose the whole chat. I have to
Sorry.
find the question.
I just do that to confound you.
It works. John says that, don't we also think of the supposed good self as part of the ego? I think this is something course students need to get very clear on.
Don't we think of the good self as part of the ego?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we think of our ego as having a good side. That's true. Yeah. But I think that's going to sort of complicate our picture for today. So I don't want to spend a lot of time. It was hard enough to get the picture I just presented.
But you should say more, though, about the fact that the ego is never on our side. It is always vicious. It is always out to attack, and there is
Yeah.
no good part of it.
There's no actual good part of it. No. But I do think that we put a halo on the ego, and, we call certain things that it does good, really. So, for instance, the Course mentions obeying certain ego ideals. There are ideals that we hold up that are really ego values. They're not truly loving, but they masquerade as something positive, dutiful, noble, courageous, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. That's what we want to do with the ego, though. We just want to defang it in
Totally.
spiritual circles and not realize that it is suspicious at best and vicious at worst. It is always out to attack. It's never your
Yeah.
friend. It's
Yeah.
never your friend.
And it constantly tries to hide its real nature,
Yeah.
either through disguise or through projection or something.
Andrew says, are we born with our ego?
I think that we form one as we go along in this life, but we've got an ancient one that we've been carrying for eons. I think there's two versions of it. There's the ancient ego, and then there's the one that we build and form that's more specific and personal and temporary to this life.
Okay. There's a lot of political discussion about just how easy it is to feel at the effects of our politics, and that incites a lot of anger.
Right. It's very easy, especially if people are dying because of our politics. But we can still, you know, embrace the Course's teachings.
Yeah. Okay. It looks like that is the end of the questions that we have in relation to this topic. There is, if you have to drop off, please do. There's one unrelated question.
Yeah.
It's course
Are you
question.
are you inviting me to drop off? Is that what you're saying?
No, I need you to answer this one because this is my favorite question. You're gonna love this one.
Uh-oh, I'm dropping off.
So for Sandra asks, are she was listening to the most recent podcast on the creative impulse, and she
Mm.
said, are our creations part of the Son of God? Did they separate from God, and when are they still awake in heaven and waiting for us to awake? Creations is a private joke here in the circle. I am perennially confused by them, and I will never understand them, and I never attempt, and that's why this question is my quote unquote favorite. But many people have it, and Sandra was asking as well. So
Okay. So I guess what I'll say is that how the Course talks, first of all, yes, they're part of the sonship. And the Course even sometimes uses the term sons to talk about them, which we put in lowercase in the CE. And I think that's lowercase as well in Helen's notes. But they're still sons that are part of the one Son of God. The Course consistently talks as if they're still awake and they're waiting for us to reawaken. I don't think that excludes the possibility that maybe or some of them have fallen asleep. I mean, our true self is still awake and has its own life in heaven while we're active in this dream. So maybe the same is true of them, but the Course never says anything like that. It always talks as if they're up there waiting for us, cheering us on, feeling gift that we're giving them gifts whenever we take a step towards home. So that's how the Course consistently talks.
And we did do a whole separate podcast on creations, and it's at circleofa.org/podcast, and it's called What Are Our Creations?
Right. Although we're now wondering why we did that.
I know. With everything going on in the world, Robert and I are like, why do we do this podcast on creations? This total outlier topic, but it's in the course. It's throughout the course, as we said.
And it's a big topic. And chapter 7 is like the
it.
hotbed of it.
Yeah, I've tried to ignore the topic of creations for years and just cannot seem to get away from it. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for being here. And we will see you tomorrow as we continue our journey through chapter 7. Tomorrow is your boundless self-fullness. And look forward to seeing you at 10 a.m. Bye for now, everybody. I'll unmute you so we can say bye to each other.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.